Test, test, test. Is
I,
yours on?
apparently I'm live.
All right, so we're going to get started. Again, welcome to the GDC Game Technology Theater. I'm going to present to you our next speakers. It's going to be Dan Nicholas and Jared Prano. They're from Phosphor Games, and they're going to have a great presentation for us. Please, anybody in the aisle, just step forward and take a seat in the booth. Thank you.
Test. Okay, cool. So, hi, I'm Dan Nicolaitis. I'm the tech director for Phosphor Games.
I'm Jared Prano. I'm the studio art director.
And the title of our talk is Tegra3 plus UE3, Sustainable Game Development in a Mobile World. But that's kind of a vague title, right? And actually our talk is full of a lot of kind of a mini postmortem of our game and full of a lot of specific examples of what we went through, a lot of problems that we faced. So we could just as easily title it, AKA How We Stopped Thinking Like a Console Developer. So let's get started. Some background on Phosphor Games. We were founded in 2009. Our core team of founders has a kind of a depth of industry experience and a console background. And so, we're also Unreal Engine 3 experts. We work closely with Epic in evolving the engine and working on new features for it. So this is kind of where we approached developing the game for mobile from, because it's kind of important in how it informs the decisions that we made and the lessons that we learned. We co-developed Connected Adventures with Microsoft, and most recently, of course, we shipped Dark Meadow. What we're going to cover in this talk is it's mostly centered on Unreal Engine 3. From our perspective, that's what we use, the engine we use for development. That doesn't mean that none of the stuff that we talk about is going to be applicable to other engines. It's probably fairly generic, but it is coming from the perspective of a very high-quality 3D engine bar. We will cover some high-level technical problems and solutions that we encountered and solved, scalable art design planning, project scope, planning, execution, along with pitfalls and lessons in our mini postmortem. And then at the end, we'll talk about how we're taking advantage of Tegra3 power. And of course, overall, the topic will be how we manage to ship the game in just over 3 months. So what we won't cover are graphics pipeline specifics, esoteric low-level issues. If you're interested in mobile graphics, I highly suggest you go see Nicholas Smedberg's talk tomorrow morning. It's going to be a great talk. It's not within the scope of this presentation. And we won't go into really low-level implementation details and how to squeeze every iota processing power out of the mobile chip, or the art pipeline, which is what Unreal solves for us. Okay, so Dark Meadow. From the top, obviously, we had to decide what we wanted to do with the game. We knew we wanted it. We saw a hole in the market for what we wanted to do, and we knew we wanted it to be a console-quality game with an engrossing story and a high-quality art style, and et cetera. These are kind of just things that we like, and we're kind of designing the game around our interests. We designed it with a creepy ambiance, and we knew it had to have a mobile-friendly design. The kicker is we only had about 2.5, 3 months to develop it. So we had to scope accordingly. And this is why we decided to use UE3. It was kind of a no-brainer for us. We're experts in the engine. We helped maintain it. Due to the really, really rapid schedule, we needed a solid base. We didn't have a mobile background. We hadn't ever shipped a game on a mobile platform before. So we wanted to just dive in and get going. And UE3 solved our art pipeline. It solved our graphics pipeline. It solved most of the low-level platform interfaces. So this isn't going to be a UE3 commercial, by the way. I'm just kind of laying it out there. So our first change list was on 5/11/11, and our target submission date was on 7/25/11. We actually submitted closer to 8/23/11, which is about a month late, and we'll get into why that is in this discussion. So still just under 14 weeks of development top to bottom for the entire game. Our core team size was 3 programmers, 3 artists, 3 designers, and 1 animator. That includes character art, effects, environment, sound design, and then we had 2 part-time programmers come on towards the end of the project to help us ship. So the vision that the most important thing that we did up front was we came at it with a really solid vision of what we wanted to do. We limited ourselves severely to these 3 back-of-box features because we felt it was extremely important, given our rigid timeline, to just dive in and work. And without this concrete vision, we wouldn't have been able to execute.
Right. So basically, we just laid out, here's what we have, and then asked the question, what can we do with what we have? So it's like, we know we have this time, we know we have this budget, which translates into people that are available to actually work on it in this time. and how much we think we can actually realistically make on it. And where's there an opening in mobile? Like what need in the market are people not fulfilling? And then what plays to our strengths? So what do we know we can do? We already knew that we could hit a pretty high visual bar. We had some very talented artists on staff, and a lot of relationships with strong art directors, concept artists, and things like that. We had a lot of experience with voice talent, and there wasn't there's not a lot of like distinctive voice characters on mobile, like a GLaDOS or something like that. And we're really interested in using an environment to tell a story. So the hole in mobile that we saw was production values. There just wasn't a lot of it. The only thing that approached what we wanted to do at that time was Infinity Blade. There hadn't been a really strong storytelling experience that people really responded to, like a BioShock. And then the layering of passive and active entertainment layers, so that you're being entertained by story or voice or characterization while you're having fun playing the actual game, like in BioShock or a GTA. So just to keep things simple, we knew that within 3 months we're not going to invent a new gameplay genre from scratch, from the ground up. So we said we're Unreal developers. We have a lot of access with Epic. So we wanted to treat Infinity Blade as though it was like the first in a new genre of action game. When Doom came along, there were a lot of games that played very similarly, but had a very different feel, a very different wrapper, a very different vibe, and then added a lot of unique gameplay features to that. We also saw that, for ranged combat, there wasn't a lot of like really compelling, gun-based experiences. Like nobody had really solved that for mobile or for touchscreens in a way that, was really addictive and got people talking. For our more horror-based and theme, and the mystical background of the weapons led us to choose a crossbow, which gave us more of an interesting mechanic than just tapping the screen to shoot a gun. The vibe we wanted to go for, instead of going for straight-out horror, was more of like a fairy tale folk legend, with a little, kind of playful, creepy, more like Tim Burton or Guillermo del Toro than like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill. We knew that we wanted, just really high-quality storytelling, which to us means also high-quality voice acting. So we spent a lot of time and listened to a lot of auditions to find the one voice that was, perfect for a VO sidekick. He has this really great British accent, and he sounds just a little loopy whenever he says anything. I don't know if he is loopy, but it just, like, everything we wrote for him just sounded amazing coming out of his mouth. And, typical horror games, they'll do a lot with events and shadows moving on the wall and things, sounds, and we just knew we weren't going to have the bandwidth to do that. So we wanted to do something where it was more like going on in the player's head, where the reality of the situation was constantly, like the ground is shifting underneath you, based on the information that this one unreliable narrator-type character is giving you.
Okay, so now at this point we have a great creative vision from Jared and our creative director, Chip, but we have to start prototyping. So we dive right in. We use an agile development process called Scrum. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. The biggest thing that got us going on the right foot is that we literally had a test map running on device on the first day. Without that, there's no way we would have been able to ship in 3 months. So for us, the lesson, and we're gonna kind of share with you the lessons that we've learned from our development efforts in this over the course of this talk. But for us, the big lesson right off the bat was using a third-party engine. We were pretty sure we wanted to use UE3, but we weren't 100% sure. As soon as we got that running on device, we were like, this was the right decision. So after prototype, we built to a full head of steam. We were in full production. We were really rapidly scoping. We felt the pressure of how fast we had to get everything done. So we cut an entire feature in the vision right up front. We had this cool alchemy feature that you would like collect things in the hospital, and then you build potions, and then you'd use them to kill enemies or heal yourself or do whatever. That was just cut. And it was a cool sounding feature, and we all were really into it, but we just couldn't get it done. And that was borne out in our actual development. We were really tight, and if we had that feature, and we wouldn't have gotten it done. So the big thing with our production was that we parallelized development as much as possible. Each programmer took a feature, a core pillar of the game, and they just kind of ran with it. And that was good and bad, mostly bad, actually. So due to the speed at which we were implementing things, we were really kind of moving at a fast pace. we really never got anything visible on device until the end of production, which is terrible. You can't necessarily expect that once everything is finally working, you're going to have a game, because that's not what we found. Our programmers were just working on stuff, and then once it was done, it got checked off a checklist, and you moved on to something else. But only at the point where we reached beta were people starting to play test and QA it and starting to realize, hey, this isn't actually a game or any fun. So the lesson there is, even if it seems like parallelizing is more efficient, sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes you want to stagger your features. And this is kind of more of a generic rule. It's not necessarily applying to just mobile, but the short time span of making a game, that's definitely a good idea. So once production was finished, we had all these features done on paper, but it wasn't a game, clearly. So we relied a lot on QA and playtesting during this time to inform us what we needed to do to actually fix things. And this was really good, and we really wish we would have done that earlier. It turned out that beta was supposed to be about 2 weeks. It turned into a month and a half. The reason, obviously, we didn't account for enough time, but we also didn't get the features online early enough. So 2 lessons: 1, early usability testing, and 2, involve QA early. Both of those are really key on mobile, even more so. So one surprising thing with our console backgrounds is that usually submission is kind of a painful experience. Submission was actually really, really easy. It turns out live support was really, really hard, and we'll tell you why. First of all, there's a lot of crashes that we ran into in the wild that users were reporting that we were not able to reproduce internally in testing. We got a lot of feedback on the forums, mostly positive, but a lot of really pointed and valid criticisms. They were asking questions, raising concerns, and et cetera. And one really repeated suggestion was that we had this XP combat summary screen that popped up after our battles, and it paused the game, and everyone felt like it totally broke the flow of gameplay, and it was just a huge pain. And they were totally right, and for some reason, nobody internally, including all the external usability testers, mentioned this at all. And we were kind of blown away by it, because once we started looking at it, we were like, wow, everyone is totally right. How did we not get any of this out of usability testing? So the lesson there is rely on usability testing, but it's not necessarily going to give you all the answers. You have to learn to roll with the punches. So quickly, about a week after we shipped, we submitted a patch for this and a few crashes. We addressed most of the major suggestions and issues immediately. We were actually on forums, on Touch Arcade, on various places where people were commenting, and we were commenting back saying, yeah, we totally get it. You guys are right. And our users loved it. They really loved it, and they felt a connection with us. They felt like we were responding to them, and that we really cared about their experience, and they evangelized for us, which is huge when you're an indie company and you're trying to build a user base, and these people are going to play our next games, and they're going to go attract their friends. And so the lesson there is listen to your users. I mean, once you've shipped, listen to what they're saying, and do what they want, basically. Our biggest issue technically was we were unable to reproduce a lot of live crashes. They were getting a lot of crashes we couldn't really repro, and the lack of TRCs, while it might seem like that made submission really easy as a console developer, it also means that you can't rely on a lot of things that you would normally rely on to be fixed for you, or caught for you, rather, by the TRC QA. So you have to do that. And it's important. I mean, a lot of times you think of TRCs as being kind of just a pain, when really they're helping to provide a quality experience for the end user. And so I think QA is actually way more important for mobile games, internal QA, than it is for console games. So if there's one big takeaway you take from this talk, and you're developing mobile games, hire QA people who are really good. During one of our updates, we even submitted a version of the game that didn't have Japanese language fonts. So all the in the Japanese store, everything was in English, and this was obviously a huge problem. We didn't even see it in testing, because it uses different packaging methods for a distribution build versus a local build. So the big lesson there is make sure you test it after it goes up into the store, preferably if you can before it is released for public consumption. So that's kind of, I know this was kind of a whirlwind, and I'm talking really fast, but I have a lot to go through. So that was kind of our mini postmortem there. We're going to go into more technical challenges and more specifics on both art and tech going forward, but I just wanted to see if anybody had any questions real quick before we move on. Okay, cool. So just some high-level technical challenges we ran into. I'll talk about some technical scope and staffing issues, performance and memory, and then how we handled targeting 3 generations of devices. So right off the bat, UE3 handled a lot of this problem for us. They handled dynamic content scaling, texture bias based on memory, detailing out certain stuff that won't run on lower-end platforms, resolution differences between different platforms, and all the low-level device interface, obviously. But this really slapped us across the face when we first started developing on this range of mobile. CPU was really underpowered on mobile platforms compared to the GPU. We were used to being GPU bound while developing console games, and now we're actually CPU bound. Part of this is because of our design includes like a really high-bone enemy, high-quality enemy and character fighting one another. Animation was just killing us, and it was stuff that we couldn't easily just LOD out on lower platforms, right? So in a lot of ways, it kind of limited the quality that we could get to because of this underpowered CPU, and it also required a lot of work on our end to deal with that problem. We could barely manage 50 to 60 draw calls in a scene at 30 frames without anything else going on, and the content was calling for 100 draw calls, and it wasn't like we could really pull back on what we were doing because it was basically like straight hallways, like there's walls and a ceiling and a floor, and like a couple debris. Like how much are you going to really be able to pull back from that, right? I mean, without it looking terrible. So our solution was mesh combining. We're eliminating draw calls wherever we could. By just combining the meshes together and having it be a single draw call. If you do this, and I suggest you do, but be careful to do it intelligently. You don't want to just go willy-nilly and combine meshes everywhere and really tear up your GPU. So good candidates would be like if you have a grouping of meshes that kind of are always near one another, obviously combine those. We use some pretty aggressive distance calling and fog, like kind of old school to not have to render things that were kind of far away. And it was a slight GPU hit, but again, we're CPU bound, so it's not a big deal. And it looked cool in our game. So yeah, gradient fog is somewhat expensive for GPU. In UE3, what happens is the CPU swaps between 2 different shaders, one of which is an expensive fog shader, the other one isn't, depending on different objects. It's not like the fog shader can't render objects that aren't fog, it's just more expensive to do it. So this actually doubled our shader count, and our load times were super, super slow because we had to compile 400 shaders. So since we're CPU bound, just let the GPU always render fog. We cut the number of shaders that we had to compile in half. Our startup time started at like a minute 30 on our lowest end device. And no matter how cool your intro video is and how well it loops, nobody's going to wait for a minute 30 to play your mobile game. That's just not going to happen. So by cutting out half of our shaders up front and then not compiling the ones that wouldn't run on the device, we ended up cutting that startup time to under 30 seconds. And that was at a small per frame GPU cost. So our most crowning achievement, this is the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of what we did, was we did not prematurely optimize. And this is so much more important when you're developing something in 3 months versus 2 years. It's still important either way, but in this case, it's not. First of all, you're developing for a mobile platform. It's not like there's a TRC team. The lack of TRCs, while it hurt us in terms of QA and not catching things that we should have caught, we don't have to meet any of the standards that aren't necessarily required for us, right? So why do we need to ship at a constant and steady 30 hertz? I mean, we could ship at 25 and nobody would notice, right? I mean, if you're sitting out there shaking your head at me and saying, no, you got to ship at 30 hertz, you're thinking like a console developer, so stop. So 5 tech change lists at the end of the project got us back 20% of our frame. 5 art change lists got us 10% more back. It took us about 2 days to go from like 22 FPS up to like 27 FPS, and we were done. So the other big thing is memory, obviously. So it's kind of hard to design content to accommodate 256 meg and 512 meg devices and up in this big range. Not only that, but you don't even have that entire pool of memory anyways. You account for the OS and any apps running in the background, et cetera. Oh, sorry. So we actually tried to stay under about 60% of the total physical memory to avoid getting out of memory crashes. So it's more like PC development in that end, but that was one of the bigger issues that we were dealing with in the entire project is out of memory issues. So our solution, again, stop thinking like a console developer. We were doing regular console airlock streaming where you kind of have this typical, like you have like an A, B, and C, and you're in B, and A and C are both streamed in and loaded and waiting, and then you go into C and you unload A and you load in D, right? And that's so that you can kind of seamlessly go from zone to zone. But you know what? You don't really need to do that. This was actually a huge problem for us because when you reach an end of the hallway, at the end of a hallway, you would have 3 doors that you could go through, right? So a user could, in the first iteration of this system, could arrive at the end of the hallway, open each of the doors, and then kind of like look in each direction. So we had to have not just A, B, and C. We had to have A, B, C, D, and E loaded, which was a huge problem. So what do? We instead, as soon as you touch a door, you load that level on demand, and then you force the user to go through it. It's no big deal, right? Like nobody really cares that they are forced to go through a door. You know, it takes 2 seconds to stream in that level on the other end. You know, the door swings open, you play a nice animation, you walk through. Nobody really cares. So that was a huge thing that we did by stopping, you know, to think like console developers. We ended up saving a ton of memory, and that worked really well for level streaming. Actually, it worked really well because the door kind of suspensefully opens, and it's like you know, you're forced to go in. You don't know what's going to be on the other side. But it's not great for AI because you can kind of tell they're streaming because you end up on a hotspot, and then you know you're kind of waiting for the AI to pop up, and it's kind of, you know, it kills the mood. Again, stop thinking like console developer. Just do a blocking load. Like why are we streaming in this AI? It takes like 10 seconds for serialization, etc. But that's because time sliced async I/O is like really, really slow when it's dealing with a slow CPU, and just let the entire CPU focus on loading it. It takes less than half a second. There's a small hitch. Literally, I think we got one store review that mentioned that, you know, can you guys get rid of the hitch when the AI are loading? Nobody really cared. So that allowed us to get like almost an instant AI spawn. So overall, the overall tech perspective that we had was, you know, with a small team, a short schedule, low-hanging fruit is king. Don't polish the tech to console standards. Polish the content to console standards. People pay for content, not tech. It may not be true when like a new generation of devices first comes out and people are really excited at what they can do. Maybe tech demos are really popular then, but at a certain point when they reach the stage of maturity that mobile devices really have now, people stop paying for tech and they start paying for content. And so just keep it simple, cut early, cut often, and focus on ROI.
So we had some challenges on the art design front, in that we didn't have a lot of budget or time for concept art. You know, when you're working with concept art, you want to kind of let it gestate. You want a healthy pre-production period where you can go back and forth, see 10 sketches, pick the 2 that you want to see refined further, and that can take a few weeks to get anywhere with that. We just didn't have that. So, was that me? Sorry. So we picked a fairly real-world aesthetic that we thought that we could hit. Okay. Oh. Sorry
about
that. So we picked a real-world aesthetic that we're pretty sure that we could hit just with enough, reference and research. We picked a hospital for our setting, a hospital that was built in the 1920s by a half-mad visionary architect. Hints of Frank Lloyd Wright with some Art Nouveau influences, and make the place now long abandoned. So we just hit Google Images. We scrubbed for anything we could possibly find to find things that match this description. Urban explorers the world over, have explored just about every abandoned hospital that is available on foot. So there's so much stuff out there. You just have a wealth of inspiration, and then you just take that and weave in details from the storyline that tie all of those different things together. So I've got a few images that show sort of a before and after of like, here was the inspiration that sort of functioned like a nice piece of concept art, but it was just a Google Images photograph, and how we interpreted it in the game. So on top we see, an old, I think it was a Soviet or a Ukraine hospital, and then a nice courtyard, and then on the bottom you see, that's roughly how we interpreted it and reworked it, making sure we didn't infringe on anything that exists or is copyrighted. Go ahead. A couple more. Probably not the best viewing forum for it, but yeah. We also had a very low budget for enemy variation because of the small team and the lack of concept art bandwidth. So we just decided to go with two basic enemy classes, one that's kind of skinny and one that's huge and hulking. And then we did 5 sets of bioorganic armor pieces that we could just sort of clip on, sort of bolt onto the things. And then 3 different texture sets to give them all different palettes. So we ended up, 2 by 5 by 3, 45 distinct enemies. It's not really ideal, but it certainly got the job done. And you can always, expand from that and add. We're going to have DLC that has more enemies and more end bosses and things. So then we use the lonely abandoned setting to the advantage by just having a very small cast, or just, characters that are on the screen that are important. So we had a unique sidekick character. He's, the guy that is the voice in your ear. You meet him at the beginning of the game. One mysterious recurring sub-boss, and then just a really cool final boss. So knowing that we wanted to have a really big impact on people with the beauty of the game, but on mobile you're sort of limited with, when you've got actual interaction and gameplay, how much you can have going on. CPU skinning can be fairly expensive. We weren't able to have more than one enemy on screen, and that was at the cost of other things. So we decided to have 2 different areas of the hospital. You would have these dense hallways where you would fight enemies, and they'd be sort of dark. And story-wise, we made sure that there was absolutely no sunlight coming into them. So we sort of worked that theme into the story, that sunlight hurts the enemies, so they can't go into any area that has sunlight coming in. So then we had these other rooms that we called sun rooms, which had windows and streaming light coming in. And there we were able to completely blow out the art budget. Like every available draw, call, and polygon went to just high-quality art. And we did more of the storytelling in there, so it was really just sort of an immersive experience when you would go into these things. And you just sort of carry that impression through other areas of the game. So my advice on actually implementing is stop thinking like a console artist, but only sort of. Bad news, if you're coming from a console background, is you're going to find limitations on mobile that might remind you of going back to older hardware. You're not having the same amount of flexibility. A lot of the features that Unreal comes with, for example, are just sort of turned off. But the good news is there's a lot of technique now that didn't exist 8 to 10 years ago that's actually been driven by the advances in hardware, but can be leveraged on lower-end hardware. You can still sculpt in ZBrush, you can use Crazy Bump, you can generate all kinds of ways to generate ambient occlusion and vertex colors. So we just baked a lot of stuff in to the actual meshes. And this is especially good for dynamic meshes, because those are where you're probably going to see the most difference between console and mobile. So we baked a lot of the lighting and other stuff into the textures using normal maps that we ripped from High Poly Sculpt. So we did pretty much the whole process of creating a high-end video game character, but then just use the data differently. So if you do it just right, even though your shader isn't doing nearly as much as it would on a console, to untrained eyes, it looks like it's pretty much there. So this, again, probably not the best format to see the difference, but the top image is without the lighting baked in and ripped, and the bottom image is the end result. And it had just sort of like more vibrance and more presence. So one of the things that hurt us was that we didn't plan for the optimization of mesh combination to reduce draw calls. We did some of this, so we were able to get where we needed to be at least, but we could have probably done more with detail and had more going on in the world if we planned for it more. So for our next games, we're just planning more for texture atlasing. If your elements are going to be used together, put them on a big texture sheet, have that texture sheet loaded at all times. That's going to help you with streaming too. And if you do have to combine them, you'll end up with one material, one draw call, and you're really at that point only worried about poly count. I think the other thing that really hurt us was just the breakneck speed, which makes it really hard to impose the same kind of like asset organization, checking things in, making sure everything's named correctly. You've just got 3 artists that are just sort of like constantly going forward. And that can hurt you later if you really need to tweak something. Oh, I don't know what my computer died. I didn't copy everything over to the new hard drive. I don't know where it is. Then you're ending up having to export stuff from the engine that doesn't have all of the information. So whatever you can do to keep on top of that and encourage your artists to do the same is really going to help you, because you're going to find it more of a burden.
One note I want to make about mesh combination, definitely plan for it, as Jared said, but the same rules of premature optimization that apply to programming apply to art. So don't prematurely optimize your art from the beginning with mesh combination until you have to.
Don't actually combine the meshes until you have to.
Right. Okay, so looking back, the things that we would change, we would design the game from the bottom up to take better advantage of in-app purchases and test them better. That was one of our big failures from our perspective. We put a lot more emphasis on range combat just from a design perspective as an essential part of the game, but we'd also do better market analysis and social media integration. We kind of approach it from a top-down perspective instead of a bottom-up perspective, and there was a great article in Gama Sutra recently that talked about how you really need to establish sales from a bottom-up perspective, identify users in different areas, determine what kind of retention rate you get in these different areas, Facebook fans, people who bought your other games, et cetera, and come up with a good plan of how to sell to those people. And if we had done that, we wouldn't have necessarily made the game any differently, but we would have known how to market the game better. And also sales and market incentives. We did it a little bit, but if you heard anything about what Epic has said about Infinity Blade, sales and market incentives are what drive the purchasing of that game. Okay, so now let's talk about how we're going to make Dark Meadow, or making Dark Meadow better with Tegra 3. So we're shipping a Dark Meadow on Tegra 3 later this month, and it's a Tegra 3 exclusive. So this is great for us because we can hit a much higher low end, and by higher low end I mean like the low end is now the high end. So in order to fully exercise the power of the new chip, we really had to make a lot of changes. And basically what I'm saying here is the entire talk that we've given up till now is basically just throw it all in the garbage. It's totally different now. Going back to the CPU being way more powerful than the GPU. So with Tegra 3, our CPU is like so powerful that we're back in familiar territory. We can use like crazy animation, draw calls, streaming. We don't have to worry about any of the stuff that we were working about before. So the first things first, we're rolling back a lot of the changes we made. Fog needs to swap shaders again, help out the GPU. Async streaming is back for levels and AI. CPU skinning, put it on the CPU. So we went from 2715 GPU CPU to 2222 after we did these things, and now we're ready to add some more stuff. And this is how we're doing it. We're basically doing it in 3 passes. Our first pass is the immediate content improvements that we can make. To us, there's 2 ways to really differentiate a game with Tegra 3, and that's there's high-level visual improvements. So that's stuff like bloom, depth of field, post-processing, anti-aliasing, etc. And then there's kind of ambiance and making the world appeal to people more. And you do that via motion. For us, making the world come alive really is about motion. And so cloth, vertex animations, fluid dynamics, particle collisions, extra draw calls, all of these things contribute to making the world feel more real. And so this is also our research pass. So we're figuring out at this point how much Tegra 3 can handle. And all of these things on this list are things that hit the CPU more so than the GPU. Our second pass is then higher CPU utilization. We're moving whatever else we can back from GPU to CPU. We're handling things like that are specific to mobile platforms like shader compilation, make that async, and et cetera. And then at the end, we'll do any of the turnkey improvements that we can do, like bloom, depth of field that we mentioned earlier, that are going to be kind of hitting the GPU a little bit more. And we're doing as much as we can to make use of the Tegra 3's geometry advantage while eliminating fill rate as much as we can. So we're reducing masked out and transparent geometry by adding verts and polys. New particle effects that we're adding should be like more tightly constrained floaties instead of big transparent sheets. So it still looks cool. They're all moving around, but they're not. They're just polys. They're not big transparent things that contribute to overdraw. And then making extensive use, a lot of use of vertex animations, vertex shaders to bring the world alive. And you can kind of see this is kind of some still shots. And at the end of this, I'm actually going to show a demo of it running on this Transformer Prime. But this is kind of some still shots of what we're able to do. All of this foliage that you can see here would be like swaying in the world, the trees be swaying in the world. And then all this grass that you can see here, that's actually modeled out. That's not transparent. So we're not dealing with overdraw. We're dealing with geometry, which is good. So what are we doing looking forward? So we really want to continue to push the envelope of console quality on mobile devices. It's still kind of just a buzzword to people, but it shouldn't be, right? The graphics are there, but we haven't seen the design, the scope, and production values quite yet. I mean, even in Dark Meadow, admittedly, it's not necessarily there yet, and we want to push it there. Core gamers still see it as a lesser medium for games, but they shouldn't. They should see it as the new medium for games. So, they've come so far so fast. There's still huge holes in the market for high production values, and people haven't adjusted yet. So our goal is to make real console quality games that will compete for Game of the Year, not Mobile Game of the Year. And we're really excited about that. So here's kind of a lessons a recap. So use an established engine, stagger your features, use early usability in QA, but be aware that it's not going to give you all the answers. Listen to your users. QA is obviously way more important on mobile. Test it live if you can, and before it goes out to users and is downloadable. Focus on ROI, and last but not least, stop thinking like a console developer. Sorry. So that's pretty much it. Anybody have any questions? Oh yeah, we're gonna show a quick demo of Dark Meadow running on our Transformer Prime actually now, and you'll kind of see the things in game that. Okay, so this is all running right now on the Transformer Prime. You can kind of see the things swaying in the worlds, the grass swaying, the kind of the floating particles that we have, like the motion that we're getting out of the tree, and et cetera. And it's running at like 50 frames a second right now, so we're clearly not overutilizing it yet. And you can see how much foliage we have. You can see this tree. I mean, before we were running this, like this tree was killing us, and now it looks great, and it's running real fast and really smooth. So yeah, this is pretty much where we're going with it. Okay, I think that's it.